This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tish Conlin, and here's Tish Talk. Today, I have a repeat guest, someone everyone loves to listen to, full of knowledge, Matthew Ehret. Matthew, for those of you who don't know, has written his fourth book. Matthew, welcome to the show. What is your fourth book? Show it to the audience here. It's we're going to dive into this topic.
Yeah, I got it right here. This is Clash of the Two Americas, Volume 4. On the Anglo-Venetian roots of the deep state. The idea was to just sort of demystify this word deep state a little bit, put some meat on the bones, since there's conflicting definitions of what it means to different people. Is it, there's, again, I don't have to go through the list, but people could have debates and fights about the same word all the time. Deep state is a very charged one. Some people, there's a lot of psyops as well, run by intelligence agencies to try to misdirect the minds of people who are not inclined to think about or believe in common narratives that are being fed to us by the mainstream media. And so for those who think outside the box, there's a lot of nets that have been created to capture the minds of those fish that jump outside the big net into smaller controlled nets and provide explanatory narratives that try to spin things in such a way that makes it seem like, the great conspiracies hurting us towards a very bad orientation are actually caused by, let's say, UFOs, hostile aliens, or the Chinese that controlled George Soros that infiltrated our government, or there's so many spins and twists. So we tried, my wife and I, who co-wrote this with me, to demystify that and really just showcase the broader historical currents of what this deep state thing is embedded in the USA, in Canada, and Europe as an international operation, which is more than any nation state. And it goes back to the days of ancient Babylon. It shapes much of, or misshapes almost everything artistic and scientific over the centuries. It has certain common modus operandi, certain very common traits that anyone's mind without a PhD can come to explore and understand and internalize. And it has certain weaknesses. Both today as much as it did back in the days of ancient Rome or Venice. 1,000 years ago, there's similar weaknesses, so it's good just to understand it and thus not fall for its traps and understand what to do to navigate through the storm.
Wow. I know I'm definitely going to pick up that book, by the way, and I'm looking forward to reading it for next time if I can get you on. I know how popular you are. Today, I want to unpack something for the audience. This is a fight I've been having with my my teenage son. I mean, a lot of the kids have been trained through this education system, atheists, the woke, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the education system is dumbed down, but I love to challenge him. He loves to challenge me. And I got stuck, and I thought, I've got to get Matthew to unpack this, the whole Darwin's theory of evolution and how it connects to the eugenics movement and this incredible clown world that we're living in today. When you can have, floating balloons that people are, they're shooting down. We have so many, events happening that are, it's so concerning, and yet you can see the threads going way back. I mean, we have all these food plants burning down. We've got train derailments. I mean, while they're saying that Ohio is safe, the Environmental Protection Agency, they're saying, it's all safe, while there's like fish, dead, and animals
floating
dead.
All the river systems and birds falling out of the sky and chickens all dying, and it smells like chlorine, and you're like, what the hell are you talking about?
It's like, that's not a concern at all, but you can't buy a gas stove, that's really concerning. So can you take us back historically? Why is it that this is pervasive throughout history? Where did it start? Do you think that Darwin's theory of evolution is just being carried out now in this transhumanism movement? And how can you connect it back? Can you give us a little lesson on that today? And I'll jump in where I can.
Yeah, okay. I'll do my best. It's a tall order, but I think we can do some justice to the idea. And for the justice that we don't do to the idea, I encourage people to pick up my new book. And there's several chapters that go into much more of a deep dive, which honestly, there's only so much you can do in the context of an oral interview live, but we'll see what we can do. So the first thing I would say, you're correct in recognizing a direct continuity between the Darwinian interpretation of nature. And what was Darwin trying to do? Well, Darwin and Alfred Wallace, who was they say co-architect of Darwin's theory, as well as the promoter of it, the loudest promoter, Thomas Huxley, aka Darwin's bulldog, as he was told. What are they doing? Well, first of all, they're looking at the new evidence that was becoming very loud of fossils that demonstrated that things were not maybe literally as they appeared by some religious interpretations of the Bible that asserted that everything just sort of appeared at a certain point, maybe 6,000 years ago, is I think what the consensus was. Not that it even says that in the Bible, but whatever. It just all appeared at once. And humans were formed walking around with monkeys and lions and petting each other in the Garden of Eden. And then, as far as the standard model explanation of life was, exactly the sort of story you see in the book of Genesis. And so the new fossil records began to challenge some of that, indicating that there were many other forms of species of life before humans that don't exist anymore. And, I don't know what the current number is. Some say it's like 99.9% of the living species that have ever been don't exist anymore. And it has nothing to do with us having too many SUVs. But there is a challenge. So how do you account for what is the causal mechanism in the universe that would account for the transformation of these different species that no longer exist, to the point that we now are sitting here as the first organic species contemplating that entire process of creation, right? No other species ever sat back and said with their like giraffe kindred, hey, how did our necks get so long? Let's think about this.
Yeah.
But you had a variety of very robust scientists positing different theories. Darwin was one of them, but he was not the only one. There's people like Lamarck, who was putting forth some interesting concepts that took into consideration matters of intention. There were other figures like James Dwight Dana, the American biologist and geologist, who did also work simultaneously at the time of Darwin and his voyage on the Beagle, who was also looking at certain mechanisms like the increased centralization of nervous systems. He's like, okay, over time, it seems like lower orders of life that are earlier in appearance in the fossil records had a wider distribution of a nervous system that didn't concentrate itself as we find it in the case of human beings or monkeys or higher forms of life, which tend to use their paws, right, in a more of an active way instead of it just being for traveling. Or like an octopus, the whole brain is like distributed amongst its tentacles, right?
Yes.
But so human beings seem to be one of the more recent appearances of creation in a material organic matter that expresses thought in a way which utilizes the hands not for travel, but as an extension of our mind to communicate. Also artistry is made possible. We're also, as Plato points out, the only creature to organically or very naturally look up. All other species kind of like look down or sideways. Birds, including who are closer to the heavens, still look straight or down. They don't tend to like look up and contemplate the stars.
Interesting.
Right? Which is that's brought up in Plato's Timaeus. And then
What
you got
was
people like Georges Cuvier, another great figure of biology around the time of Darwin. Karl Ernst von Baer, who was also looking at harmonics, like how do you understand the harmony of the different organs making up organisms emerge in such a way that if, like, let's say the giraffe's heart has to be a certain size, its liver at a certain size, its neck has to be of a certain strength, in order just to maintain an equilibrium of what its nature demands. And if one thing were a little bit too big or processed blood too much, it would just die. It would either atrophy or die. So they were looking at these questions of harmony, purpose, design, that each creature within a biosystem would fulfill a purpose within something. So they were looking at matters of purpose, of directionality. So these were the sorts of robust ideas being debated and discussed. And it wasn't.
I was going to say with the theory of evolution, what a lot of people recognize is the concept of survival of the fittest. And then, we're taking this concept throughout history with the eugenics movement. It's like, what makes someone fit? And then who's deciding how you're deemed to be fit? What Was there a competing with creationism? Can you explain that a little bit? How that's connected now to these eugenicists, because they're always deeming what is superior and what will survive and what won't.
Yeah. Right. Well, so the first thing I would say, it's good that you're recognizing a false dichotomization between literal creationists who have a literalist's reading of the Bible versus the Darwinists, and we were told we had to pick an extreme. And this was a false debate. It was never true. It was never a matter of picking one of these two extremes. Like either you're a scientist who believes in truth, and thus you're a Darwinian, or you are a person of faith, and thus you believe in the literalist's reading of the Bible. And the way Thomas Huxley, who was known as Darwin's handler, oversaw these public debates, which were covered by magazines like Nature magazine, which Thomas Huxley co-created to promote Darwinism, was to basically find the weakest fanatical representatives of the Anglican Church who hated Darwin, and then put them up in very public media coverage environments to have then debate not with Darwin, but to debate with Thomas Huxley, because Huxley was the one who was more capable of putting into words vicious qualities of polemical discourse that could annihilate and make his ignorant rivals look like fools. Really? He was very creative and very misanthropic, but they never really allowed Darwin to debate his own position because he couldn't really. Bit of a introvert. Yeah, whether or not that was because maybe he didn't even write his own theories. I've seen interesting writings about that, but whatever. Let's just say he did write his own theories, and he had his handler so that was the way. It would pick a side. Now, all of the voices, like I just mentioned, Georges Cuvier and Lamarck and James Dwight Dana and Karl-Heinz von Bana, and there are many others who were doing actual robust work on the principles of direction, intelligent design, which was not creationism, but actually founded upon real solid scientific principles. They were all sort of brushed out of the mix, and people found themselves picking a side. Now, one of the problems, and I'm going to get back at the question of survival of the fittest as a geopolitical philosophy more than a scientific one, and its usefulness, the usefulness of making this appear to be a scientific principle.
For the depopulation agenda.
Yeah, that comes in. But so the first thing is that where was Darwin off? Well, number one, in his system, it demands several things. Number one, randomness has to be assumed in the Darwinian system to be a causal mechanism of change. So there's random mutations going on. It's just posited that it's like rolling of the dice randomly. And at some point, sometimes the dice roll the right way and you get a bigger claw. That bigger claw is then used to basically assist yourself in expressing your desires for sex, spreading your seed, having food, and destroying your rivals. So in a world of supposed diminishing returns, there's always this scarcity function that causes the demands for bigger feathers, bigger claws, faster spurts that allow you to have more sex, spread your genes, kill your neighbor, kill your rivals for scarcity. So that's part of it. The other thing is that it demands also gradualism, that species under the Darwinian mechanism have to be assumed to slowly grow a claw millimeter by millimeter, slowly, gradually change. Now, the problem here, crisis-wise, for the Darwinians was that in the fossil records themselves, we never really see evidence of such gradualism ever occurring. What you tend to find is whole systems disappearing and new systems with different attributes emerging in the sedimentary rocks over time. So what you seem to have are these discontinuous leaps, sometimes known as discrete versus continuous. So discrete is like a piano. The keys on a piano. Continuous would be like the bowing of a cello, right? Whereas like the A-E-I-O-U would be like the discrete idea of vowels, right? There's like 26 letters, but the continuum of sound between all of those letters is of an infinite spectrum. So they're imposing, the Darwinians needed to impose a system that would blind us to any evidence of creative leaps or directionality in nature, because we are, after all, the effect of nature. Human beings emerged out of a natural process with laws in the universe that existed before humans and before even living matter existed. There was still gravity, electromagnetism, the laws of the universe that shape it all. So you would imagine that some of those laws would be imprinted within the evidence of the fossil records and within our own experience as human beings as well. We might express universal traits that might be, let's say, discontinuous and creative, of bearing leaps of higher potential, going from systems of lower order to higher order potential. You might find directionality. And that's another law in the Darwinian system, is it denies, and ask any honest Darwinian if they allow directionality, and they will say no directionality, because that is the directionality implies a moral assumption onto the system, because directionality is directed towards what, better or worse. Better and worse are the artifacts of moral considerations, right? Better and worse, good, bad. So they're like, no, that's not scientific. Science is the severing of all human thought and sentiment from the assumed cold amorality that is nature. So, but we actually, so then you're left with another paradox. Not only do you have to deal with the evidence of the discontinuous fossil records, but then you also have to deal with the fact that, well, there's evidence that we were simple-celled amoebas, something like they could say the Precambrian period, maybe 500 million years ago, where there were just simple-celled, very, very low potential organisms floating around in like, early swamps or whatever.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden there's us, right? Who are having like abstract concepts, sharing ideas of freedom, virtue, love over the course of electricity being transformed by, from my thoughts, shaping my body, having certain concepts that create frequencies and waves picked up by my recording devices, sent off by light to you, received, and then transformed back. Like, you're saying all of that is just random luck? Well, that's a big barn you want me to like hold on my back here.
I showed my son a video because that's what he's learning in school, right, from his teachers, and then they're all atheists. I mean, there's no soul component to our journey, but the odds of the randomness working were like this unbelievable number. That's it was literally mathematically impossible. There's no incremental leaps in the human development. I mean, there's no like small, like we go, a longer finger, the thumb change, there's none of that in the fossil records at all. Like there's no like, amoeba, then we get this, then we're one-legged dragging around on land, there's none of that with the when we go back. So, but this whole concept of survival of the fittest is imprinted in us very strongly. And in our subconscious, like the cultural Marxism, there's that, and it keeps it the competition, the scarcity, and you have to be the fittest in order to make it. That seems to be the thing that is connected with it to me the most.
Yeah. Well, and this is where it gets interesting. Well, it's already been interesting, but it gets even more interesting because in the idea of the Darwinian mechanisms of survival of the fittest, like nature selects the most fit. Well, number one, you're still allowing the concept in a dirty way of selection. Like something is selecting, if it's nature, that's still selecting the fittest. You're still sort of imposing some moral judgment onto science, first of all. But number two, we actually find evidence in nature of a lot of synergy and cooperation. Even like, you see these cases in YouTube of like mom lions who kill like a prey and then see a baby and will try to adopt the baby as their own, or like tigers who adopt baby piglets if they're a mom, or even males do the same thing with children of another species that they would normally, you would think, eat. And it's like, explain that by any survival necessity or biological necessity. It makes no sense, but it's everywhere. But they have to ignore things as just being like, well, what I often see is a Darwinian will say, but that's just the irrationalism of the universe. There's cases of just absurdity because the universe is ultimately without purpose anyway. So it's like, or maybe there are purposes that you are unwilling to even think about because you're ideologically committed to your current filters. So,
well, systems of cooperation, I mean, it's just like now it's easier to control people with division and scarcity and competition, but systems of cooperation scientifically shown over and over to work better.
Much better. Always better.
Always better in the end.
Yeah. So, I mean, like,
go ahead.
Yeah. So the thing I just wanted to get at quickly is that Darwin admitted in his autobiography, and I've cited this quote many times because it's so important, that he was only able, and this is 1838 that he wrote this, and he says, or he wrote it later on, but this is an experience in 1838 when he was on the Beagle and doing his voyages in the Galapagos and stuff. And he writes, in looking for a mechanism to account for the appearance of new species and the destruction of old species, I happened upon, someone gave me, he doesn't say who, Thomas Malthus's Essays on Population of 1799. And it was then by reading this essay, this wonderful essay as he describes it, that I had better had an appreciation for the struggle for survival in a world of diminishing returns that human beings go through, which I then gave me an understanding of a theory by which to work. And of course, he's describing now what he's going to use that becomes Darwin's theory of evolution. What is Malthus? So he's basically saying he just took the mechanism of Malthus. What is Malthus? Malthus is very clear. He literally says in the first edition of his Essays on Population, being himself an employee of the British East India Company who's working at the British Haileybury College, which in Manchester, which is the primary college of the British East India Company economists, and all of their managers have to be processed in Haileybury College. He's the head of that. So he's working for the empire. He's nominally a man of the cloth, a man of the church, but he's in his book talking about how to scientifically manage or cull human populations using the gifts that God has given us. And he literally spends time talking about disease, famine, war, as being unfortunate gifts. And he says that it's sad that we have to see famine and war and disease kill people and babies, but they're ultimately necessary and useful tools for leaders of society to manage the population, which will necessarily overpopulate if we let people procreate as they will. And so it's his theories were behind the 26 famines that were orchestrated by the British Empire over the course of 200 years in India, which killed well over 80 million people, probably in the hundreds of millions of people unnecessarily, but by controlled famines. And the British Empire, when they managed India, that's what they did. They did the same thing to Ireland. It was a Malthusian science that justified the cold logic of extracting the food from Ireland during a time of famine. So a certain famine did hit, but it wasn't famine that killed the people. Ireland produced more than enough food, and it wasn't just potatoes. They produced a lot of cattle, a lot of wheat, a lot of grain, a lot of oats, a lot of other things. So why is it that a blight in potatoes caused 4 million or 2 million Irish to die? No. You had British there enforcing a Malthusian policy to force the farmers to give up their food, export it to foreign markets, and let them suffer and die in the millions in Ireland. That was Malthus. So it's cold, anti-scientific, pro-imperial systems of theorizing to justify empire. Now, the problem was in the optimism of the creative leaps that were happening in the 19th century, when there was still a greater faith in a creator that made us in the creator's image, that mandated us with the demands to be fruitful and multiply, which people took very seriously. And that didn't simply mean multiplying like a virus. To be fruitful was the condition upon the multiplication. So you can only have more people if you were being fruitful. Being fruitful is qualitative, multiplying is being quantitative. So that meant creative new discoveries, inventions had to be encouraged, inspired, and applied in the form of new technologies that then allowed people to not only leap outside of the limits to growth, which was how the United States went from, it quadrupled its population in the first 40 years of its existence. It was by these spirited leaps of faith into the unknown that allowed for new discoveries to happen. And it was through faith, because if people who were making those big discoveries did not have faith that there was something there truthfully to be discovered, then they wouldn't have discovered those things that they discovered. So you have to, because it's like two people could have the same evidence in front of them, but one doesn't believe that truth exists, the other does. They will get two different outcomes with the data you present them. So that was what was becoming more normalized around the world, was this idea that we could always leap beyond the limits to growth. We could always support more people at a higher quality of life. And Malthus was becoming unpopular. So Thomas Huxley, being it that he worked for, he worked for the British Royal Society. He was a very high level grand strategist with a lot of hate of humanity. He worked in syphilis-ridden regions of London. I mean, he saw a lot of bad things when he was like the assistant to a surgeon. Like he wasn't born from a blue blood rich family, but he developed this hardcore creative hate that he wanted to put to work for masters, which is what he did when he became Darwin's handler. And they needed to then give more strength to the survival of the fittest ethic, which was, again, like I said, going unpopular with the collapse of Malthus. And so the Darwinian interpretation of natural selection became the tool. But the problem was, even though people started abiding by the Darwinian doctrine in interpreting natural science, they still didn't really want to apply it or extend it to organizing human societies around the weeding out of the unfit. And even Darwin, to his cousin Galton, Francis Galton, Sir Francis Galton, who was the sort of the founder of eugenics. Darwin at first didn't like the extrapolation of his system of logic onto human societies. And he even says in his Descent of Man, he is like, what other species is stupid enough to allow its most unfit to breed or to even exist? Only humans are this stupid, he says. And then he says in the next paragraph, but we are the only moral creature, and thus we are impelled not to kill off the old or the weak. And that's what he says. And I think he was being genuine personally.
Okay.
I think what he just said. He would rather not that his logic be true.
Right.
But in his letters, public letters to his cousin Galton, who was assigned to find a more solid extrapolation onto human systems of the Darwinian mechanisms, and that became, again, eugenics, the science of weeding out the unfit. He admits, you have made, Galton, a convert out of me. And he admits, after a few months of back and forth, he's like, you win, I'm wrong. Eugenics is sincerely the queen of sciences. You're right. And you have then, so what is eugenics? It is the role of the government to make the world better. Well, if that's true, well, how do you define better, right? And if the gene pool can be contaminated with people who reproduce but have low IQs, who have low genetic stock, low breeding, who are criminally prone, you could then say, well, that letting that go unchecked is making the world worse. And so we want to create conditions whereby that does not happen by either sterilizing or euthanizing those who are holding back the force of evolution, and also encouraging the better stock to breed. Or later on, what became promoted by Thomas Huxley's grandchildren, Aldous and Julian alike, as well as Leonard, their father, who was also the head of the British Eugenics Society in his own time and worked closely with Galton, is the idea of test tube babies, like in Brave New World.
Yes.
We'll breed the alpha pluses, we'll breed how many alphas, how many betas, how many gammas, how many low level epsilons who are going to be bred to be stupid and enjoy doing repetitive dirty work in mining, for example. This became a more sort of scientific, modern technocratic twist to the same old thing. But it does have a direct continuity, like I said, and Darwin's sons, his grandsons, are all high-level operatives working for the British Eugenics Society, Galton too. And Galton even said, I see no reason why this science should not be a new religion in the future. And he was speaking for a big chunk of the oligarchy that he represented, who wanted to replace the old traditions and the old value structures that animated all civilization, not only Christianity, but Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, like all of the world's ancient traditions that carried with them certain common concepts of morality, ethics, respecting your neighbor, respecting the idea that you have a soul, that you're more than the sum total of your parts, that you're made in the image of an architect given different names, but that has certain attributes of love and of reason that made the universe according to discoverable law. Those ideas had to be destroyed. And so eugenics was the most convenient package to bring about a new sort of pseudo-religion for the elites that would then be used to then justify the control of the minds and physical world in which the victim people were expected to adapt to, like animals. Because unlike animals, we're typically a creature that creates, new situations. If there's an unjust world, we can do like Ben Franklin, if we're creative and moral and courageous, and create a new set of rules that are not fixed and rigged by sociopaths. We can create new rules in a lawful way. We can break rules in a lawful way. Ha, irony.
Yeah.
And they don't want that. They want us to think about only just accepting standard models or consensuses shaped by priests, experts, that we then
Right.
just adapt to like animals in a zoo.
I have a question because I've listened to a few of your podcasts and I lost you for a bit. And this whole requirement. So you see how there's this breakdown of society. I had a guest on, we talked about cultural Marxism and how they need to break down the family and, and all of the traditional values and really attack Christianity here in Western countries. Sort of we were founded on that. And but why do they need to do that? When they break down the individual with all of this degeneracy, like I don't really understand how that connects to sort of improving the gene pool when everything they do, and you can walk outside your door and you see how society has declined. Drug addiction is up, pornography. I mean, we're not improving society. What is their end game when they are using all of these things to harm us? And we know that the education is so poor here in Western countries. The kids have been dumbed down. They have the chemical ways of dumbing us down. So are they breeding the next role of factory workers and low-level miners? Are they dumbing us down for that? Because they've come to the point where they're like, we've got AI. We've got so much AI, we're going to bow down to the gods of AI. Can you explain that? So it looks like, how can they be doing good when they're dumbing us down and they're making us addicted and they're breaking us all apart and demoralizing us, and people are committing suicide in droves? What's the end game? Can you connect those dots a bit clearer? How's that?
Yeah. Well, that's where the hypocrisy of the whole thing becomes more clear. And it's like, did Malthus believe in Malthusianism? I've seen no evidence that Malthus actually believed ultimately in his own theories. He produced his theories, as he was commissioned to do, to justify a system of master-slave relations in a society that was expected to adapt to a very immoral, perverse set of standards under an empire. The British Empire was the only one world government known at that time, the empire in which the sun never set. And they had to maintain, this tiny little island, you're like, how did that tiny island subdue 23% of the world's landmass and so many of the different people of the world, right? How did that happen? Now, they had to do a lot of dirty games. They had to create rules that would be designed to be only broken by those who shape the rules, right? Like, you get somebody into a casino to get addicted to the norms of the casino. You're not going to see the owners of the casino playing their own games. They know that it's rigged. They're creating addiction. They're creating a system where people undermine their own sovereignty by playing into the great game, as it was called. So Malthus had enough evidence at his disposal to know that human beings were not animals, and his whole point was, well, just like the animals, we have to check the excess breeders of the animal kingdom under zookeepers and others can't just let their creatures in the zoo just always reproduce. Same thing for humans. So he consciously didn't make a qualitative differentiation between any other order of species in the biological kingdom and human beings. He said we're just a descent from, effectively, apes and wolves. So if that were true, and if the law of the jungle were what animates and what shapes the laws of humankind, well, yeah, maybe you could say that Malthus was right, but he knew that he was wrong. He knew that there was evidence to the contrary, but he pushed it anyway. And Thomas Huxley, did Thomas Huxley believe in Darwin? No, I've got letters that I've cited before that are publicly known where Thomas Huxley even says he's not persuaded at all that Darwin's right. And yet, despite that, he put more effort than anybody that ever existed into fighting to advance and normalize acceptance for Darwin's theory. So why? Well, it's political expediency. Ultimately, it's really that they want the effect of a society that believes it is scientifically required that we be a certain way, that we adopt a certain identity for ourselves, which, if we choose to do, would make us much more capable of being manipulated by forces from the top
Yes.
who want us to sort of adapt to a mob or a herd. The more you can get people, ironically, here's an irony and a trick by empire, okay, that I've discovered over the years. And this has been applied since ancient times, since Pericles' Athens and the decay of the mob rule of Pericles under the democracy of Athens that killed Socrates. If you could get individuals to become selfish and self-centered so that they focus their identity around the cultivation of the pleasures of the flesh
Yes.
and avoidance of pain, if you can do that so that they hyper-individualize or atomize, right, it's all me, ironically, you will get them to become more herd-like.
Oh, I have to say this because this is what's happening in our society, because we've all become so self-indulgent, self-focused, self-centered, that even with what we've seen happen over the last 3 years, the few of us, the few patriots that stepped in are now burning out because so few people have that concept, that simple concept of love yourself, love your neighbor like you love yourself, because it's all about me. And it's all about, well, I better not say anything because I'll get screwed. Let them get screwed instead. And the funny thing is, when we all live like that, we're all going to get screwed, because the end goal I always see in these concepts are just power. It's been going on since the beginning of time. It's like they see there's more of us and they just got to knock us back, because they don't want us to be smart enough to challenge them either. Then you get fluoride in water and all sorts of injections. And then this woke ideology in the schools. And it's a simple game that's been going on for millennia, is power. And they now say, with the advent now of AI, that, we're useless eaters, like Noel Harari says, we're hackable animals. So, I mean, that takes MK Ultra to a whole new level of mind control, when you can hack into someone's thoughts and, kind of control them. That's the ultimate master-slave relationship. I think that's what they'd love, because it is all about power. I mean, and that's what people have to start questioning. What's behind the system, and who stands to gain?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you brought up Yuval Harari and his solution for useless eaters and hackable humans. How do we deal with the new useless class? Very useful. It's a useful guy to listen to a few of his dirty, perverted speeches, because he's trotted out as being the voice of the new ethical norms that they want to bring into being in their wet dream fantasy world of what they want this sort of clean big kill global fascism to be. And they've got their fantasies, but it's just that it's a fantasy thing. So it's useful because he just puts it out there. It's like reading Brave New World Revisited from 10 years after Brave New World. Aldous Huxley writes Brave New World Revisited to reevaluate where is society now gone after his work was published in 1933, for the first time. And he's commenting on wow, we didn't have Soma when I wrote this, but now with LSD 25, what a remarkable effect it's having. And people are like, oh yeah, he was warning us. And it's like, no, he was not warning you. It's predictive programming.
Yes.
He's working with his brother Julian. They both have 2 assignments to carry out cultural warfare against all of us in 2 different domains. Julian has better eyesight, so he was assigned to do his grandpa's role in carrying out the family tradition of being horse for empire in the scientific domain. That's where he founded UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, in 1946. People can read his manifesto that he wrote for the damn thing. It's still on the UNESCO website. I don't know why they didn't take it down yet. It's pretty embarrassing. But he literally says, 1946, Hitler made eugenics look kind of bad, but it's still the most important of all sciences. So we have to find a way to make the unthinkable once again become thinkable by giving it a new package. And he also says that we have to focus on our reforms in education going forward now, focusing on the baby boomers being born after World War II. That's the new targets now. We can't really deal with the old generation. They're too hard to crack. They still believe in Christianity, and they risk too much in World War II to stop the fascist machine. So we can't really deal with them so much, but we'll get their kids and grandkids. That's what we'll do.
Yes.
And he said, the purpose of education has to be to customize the youth towards the necessity of world government as a way to solve our problems. That's one thing he says. He says this while at the same time he's not only a lifelong member, but he becomes president of the British Eugenics Society, which he maintains all the way up until 1962, right? While he's in this position, He is the godfather of the modern environmental movement, first having created the International Union for the Conservation of Nature as the first in sort of ecological modern ecology movement in 1947, which then he also adds to his repertoire by co-founding with Prince Bernhard, an actual former Nazi, unrepentant, and Prince Philip Mountbatten, a eugenicist, unrepentant, who wants to be reborn as a deadly virus to solve overpopulation, Prince Philip. They co-found the World Wildlife Fund for Nature to raise money for the International Union for the Conservation of Nature in 1961. That's with Julian Huxley. And so all this, listen, within that context, reread Brave New World, but read Brave New World Revisited, right? It's available online. People can read it for free, get a sense, and then listen to his recorded speech to Berkeley on the ultimate revolution. Listen to it. He just literally talks to these young social engineers, these wannabe alphas in 1960, right before he dies, saying, well, yes, there's always been an oligarchy, and it's always represented a fraction of the percentage of the population, much like an iceberg. And we must always presume as a universal constant that there shall always be an oligarchy. And so the best that we can do as young social scientists of tomorrow is to become servants of that oligarchy. And he's just going through this nasty, twisted, and these kids are eating it up. They're like, oh yeah, me too, me too. And, he's talking to these friggin' brats, right, in an audience, and talking about the greatness of the ultimate revolution, how we can get people to by promoting psychedelics and magical mushrooms, and he promoted LSD 25 through his Doors of Perception. That's where the Doors got their name. He's like, we can get people to love their concentration camp, have a concentration camp, as we say, without tears. And so the electric fence will be in the mind and not physical. And people will be shocked even before they get close to the electric fence, and they will love their shackles. And that will be the ultimate revolution. That's the end of history. So, and so that's really when you hear people like Francis Fukuyama championing the New World Order in 1991-92 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, saying like, it's the end of history, guys. That's really the type of shit they're talking about. It's just like, it's transhumanism. And by the way, last thing I'll say, to link this to transhumanism, Julian was also the very word transhumanism was founded by two guys in 1954. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit satanic priest, and who led the Jesuit infiltration and modernization of the Catholic Church to bring in, there's a lot of weird stuff that happened in the 60s in the Catholic Church. But then the other guy that was his close bosom buddy for many years was Julian Huxley, who officially coined the term transhumanism to describe basically the new eugenics as being a science for the elite to the more than humans to manage the less than humans. The Übermenschen said in Nazi chain terms to manage the Untermenschen, the less than humans. Well, so that's really it. That's what Yuval Harari is serving.
It's a fascinating time to be living. Must be for you as a historian, because I'm just like picking up like on all of these new books, like Elena Freeland. She goes into depth to describing the prison, the electrical grid that they're trying to create, basically turn us into free range chickens, chipped and eating bugs and GMO food. And if you go 15 minutes outside of your zone, your car will shut off, and maybe there'll be some sort of shock thing with an electrical. That's again, like a wet dream for them. If they could get that built, they would love to control us to that level, because it is power and control. I don't believe for a second it'll get there, but they're rolling out the 15-minute cities and smart cities. So there's crazy stuff happening with AI too. You look at robots and their faces are so real. And if they're just rolling it out now to us, it's been around for a long time. As they pit us against each other, constantly. Where do you think things are going to go? How crazy is it going to get in the next little while before we get some of these crashes? Because I personally believe that there's only so many people who are kind of waking up to what's going on. It'll be after there's a lot of crashes that will be forced to rebuild. What's your...
Well, there's different scenarios going forward. I tend to agree from a certain level that a crash... Well, I know a crash is coming on. The crash is built into the system. The question is, how do you deal with that fact of life? Does it have to happen? Do people have to suffer and die en masse? Most people are living in poverty. They're living paycheck to paycheck. They're living in a very precarious phase. That's why suicides have spiked. Drug use and antidepressants and even euthanasia in Canada is like obviously spiked.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So does that have to? Does that level of destruction have to occur? No, it doesn't have to occur. It doesn't have to occur. And I get a little. Sometimes I hear certain people amongst our community who say, well, all we have to do is just buy land, turn our assets into real estate, land, and gold, and we'll navigate through it. And it's like, okay, that for the few people who actually have some savings and the ability to pay off, don't get in debt. Just stay out of debt, pay for your house. And it's like, okay, for the few people who can do that, okay, but the vast majority who are listening to you, they can't do that.
No, it's not
that's ultimately very disempowering.
It is.
So the thing that I think would be possible, even at this late stage, would be for, in the case of the United States, the fight is primarily located there because the center, the focal point of destruction that's been, that the oligarchy has been working for over 200 years to undo was the American Revolution. This is why 8 American presidents died while in office, from Harrison all the way to JFK and his brother and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And that's why, there was so much effort put into a color revolution overthrow of Donald Trump, who by all accounts I think did have the actual votes to win the thing. Yes. I think that there was a collusion between big tech, Dominion voting machines, and intelligence agencies to ensure that there were a coup. Because I think that the oligarchy recognized that what awoke in 2016 was a breaking of the script. Hillary was obviously supposed to be put in to continue the Obama policy that would have already probably launched World War III by now if that hadn't been derailed for the time that it was.
Just imagine how many people might be gone from the planet now if he hadn't been elected.
Trump bought us a lot of time. And also, what he was doing, people don't even realize this, he was calibrating the United States to create an alliance with Russia and China. And he got the U.S. military he forced the U.S. military to work and cooperate with the Russian military in defeating ISIS in Syria. He extracted the CIA operations from the U.S. conventional military systems. That's why he had a lot of support from the military, people like General Flynn and many others, Chris Miller. China as well had huge backdoor channels with Trump. He just appeared, one day with the vice premier of China in the Oval Office. Nobody expected it, unannounced, just saying like, yeah, by the way, we should get a U.S. Russia-China alliance around economic development so we stop putting money into nuclear weapons that can only destroy the world. He just said that in May 2019. That freaked out the deep state. And so he did a lot of things. He was threatening to take the United States out of the World Health Organization, to sever the U.S. from its obligations to abide by NATO's programs, to pull the U.S. military out of the quagmire in China's backyard by becoming friends with Kim Jong-un and eating chicken wings together there, and making Korea a friend. He did this. He was doing things on so many levels, and so many. And the point that I'm getting at here is that even to this very day, the only thing viable that could turn this around would be that MAGA movement of viable Republicans and conservatives in the United States and independents, and maybe some better leaning disgusted Democrats who want to just get out of the filth. But there's still some organized force, and Trump is still fighting. And I think that is one of the points that cannot be discounted, although there are a lot of efforts by the media, both mainstream as well as much alt-right, that's been contaminated with getting people to go to sleep thinking, no, give up on that idea. He's a failure. It's all about Ron DeSantis. And it's like, I'm not against Ron completely, but at the same time, he's shady as all sin. He's got some connections to the Bush family.
He's a globalist in disguise, I've heard. He's going to be outed soon. I don't think he's going to get.
I feel that that's the case, but let's just say, I'm being diplomatic, and let's just say I give him the benefit of the doubt, and I say that he's actually a good guy. Let's say I say that. Well, at the same time, okay, he did some good things in Florida on a state level.
He did. I appreciated his stance on the shot, in particular with kids. When you're a mother of kids, that was
a good thing. That's a good point. Points where they're due. But does he have the capacities? Has he demonstrated the capacities to not only navigate through a federal power structure involving super hostile power structures, agencies, intelligence agencies, private sector, public sector networks, and an international community? Does he have any of those wits to navigate in that world in a useful way? I have seen no evidence that he does. I have seen evidence that Trump has built up capacities over the course of many decades of doing deals, businesses, and having a general good sense of the terrain, that he was able to, he could do certain things and lift certain things that even like a good version of Ron DeSantis, which I don't even think exists, couldn't even do if he wanted to.
No, I
So-
agree. And I mean, I have to say, because I mean, I listened to your conversations and many others, and you probably heard this too. There's this whole fraction of people who think that he's actually still the president. He's calling shots behind the scenes, and he'll be back next year. Who knows, right?
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I try to do like you say.
Yeah, I hear you.
Discipline mind, because you can take so much in.
Yeah.
But I mean, whatever, I mean, I feel actually heartened because I go out just like the John Birch Society recommended. And I've been doing this for years, talking to people, and I see a shift in them. Like they're more open to information.
Yeah.
You can get doom and gloom. It's the long run, right? This isn't going to be solved in a year, maybe not even 5, maybe 10 years. But when you know how corrupt a system is, this whole thing built on a system of competition with Darwin's theory of evolution, survival of the fittest has been perpetrated throughout society. It's in our minds. It's like collective in your minds, and you're constantly competing against your neighbor. You don't want to help your neighbor because everything's scarce. If we can shift to like a world of abundance where we can learn how to cooperate again, we can build better systems everywhere. And it reminds me of another thing that's been rammed down our throats. So we have Darwin versus creationism. I don't know how you can, where you can explain it in between, or, somewhat, what you think might actually have happened. But another theory that's been rammed down our throats is this whole germ versus terrain. You have Beschamp versus Pasteur, and apparently Beschamp was a much better scientist, but he was kind of quiet and introverted. He had so many more credentials, and he was writing way back hundreds of years ago how it's not about the germ. There's no germ. It's your internal environment.
Okay.
So what happened there? It's similar. We got hijacked. Pasteur was kind of a bully. He wasn't as smart. On his deathbed, he kind of confessed it wasn't the germ, it's your terrain. Basically saying you don't need to be worried about viruses and little things floating in the air that are going to get you if you have a good internal system in your body. But think who gained from that. So instead, we've gone all these hundreds of years down the whole path of the germ, the deadly germ. Think of what the pharmaceutical companies have gained from that, promoting that theory. And it's a lot like Darwin's theory of evolution, if you ask me. It's the same thing. We've been trained to believe something that benefits those at the top level of command, in control, for their own reasons. And I mean, you just see that everywhere now once you start to see the patterns.
Yeah. Well, I know that the oligarchy, one of the techniques, you and I have talked about this so much, is simply creating extreme polarizations and then get people to fight polar extremes, right? Absolute radical creationism versus radical Darwinism, fight. Now, neither one actually had a claim to truth. That was lost in the mix, in the fighting. Same thing for, like, are you an Austrian school follower of a disciple of von Hayek and von Mises of the Austrian Habsburg School of Economics, which believes in absolute personal liberty and thinks that anybody who thinks of the collective good is intrinsically tyrannical, road to serfdom? Or are you a Keynesian, an imperial Keynesianist who thinks only top down and thinks that anybody who thinks about individualism is thus stupid and selfish and ignorant to the greater good? It was a false debate. Keynes and Hayek were both Malthusians who believed and von Hayek was a Malthusian. I actually cite in my article, his own remarks on the necessity of population, of having an authority that only grants the right to reproduce to those who are able to reproduce, not to those who are not able to demonstrate their own power of being sovereign people. He also calls for a world government entity to enforce the rules of the system onto the nations of the world who have to play by the same rules. So he actually is for world government, although he's also for individual liberty, which is like, you think that might be contradictory? Hell yes. But yet we're told we have to be one of the two schools. Now, both of them were, it was an artificial debate orchestrated in the London School of Economics, in the London Times, that got people to forget about well, what was actually going on in terms of what Franklin Roosevelt was doing, the Frederick List movements of anti-Nazis in Germany, the Frederick List movement and the American system movements of Lincoln followers in Russia, who were all active and not doing any one of those two extremes. That was all like washed out of the discussion, which shaped so much of the last 50 years, 60 years of our history, is this fake polarization. So I think the thing with Beschamp and Pasteur, like I've got here a book by Beschamp called Blood in its Third Anatomical Element.
Oh, I have that too. I just bought it.
It's a good, yeah, it's interesting stuff in here, and I think there's a lot of value. And I think what we've had is a problem of losing nuance, though, because like, is it the case that Beschamp is wrong about the environment of our bodies and the proper harmonics and equilibrium of our bodies? No, he's not wrong at all. That is a dominant, I would say, driving factor. And take into consideration also the electromagnetic factors that they didn't really know how to think about so much back then. It's more important, right? But is it wrong to say that bacteria and other forms of pathogens might enter into our body that catalyze some form of disturbance and that induce a certain so-called dis-ease? No, there's actual evidence that bacteria, unclean water, things like that, drank, will also bring with it an inducement into sickness of a variety of ways: fever, vomiting, other things. So it's not like,
yeah, I was going to say, because one of the things, I mean, and yeah, there is something in between. We could use this as an analogy for almost everything.
Yeah.
What they said was that when doctors started washing their hands, that was, here it is about the germ. People weren't dying on the operating table. But then they said that really introducing foreign materials into the body is the body will fight them naturally. But I mean, you read
so
that as well.
Here's the thing. Is washing your hands before surgery a dumb thing to do? No. Washing your hands before surgery is not a dumb thing to do. It's perfectly fine to wash your hands before you do surgery in somebody's body. It's the question of ideological. Do you start obsessing like Howard Hughes over, he ended up becoming such a germaphobe that he was like isolating himself, walking around with shoe boxes, like not shoe boxes, but the Kleenex boxes, right? And he became petrified of these invisible entities everywhere, right? Everything had to be sterilized to the point that he became sick, and that's what happens to our kids when we abide by that. There's always this question of balance. I think that Pasteur I think he's been a little maligned personally, and I'm weary of anecdotal evidence. So when I hear people, and again, when I look at the Beschamp book and a lot of the people about Beschamp, the thing that I don't like is the tendency to rely upon anecdotal evidence of I heard, she heard, this person say, I heard that Pasteur said, I heard that Einstein said, I heard that Edison said this. But it's like, give me the evidence. Where did he say it? Give me the context. That falls short. So I think there's been a lot of effort over many generations to get us to think we have to like pick an extreme, like we do the von Hayek versus Keynes thing. And I actually see a lot of virtue in a lot of what Pasteur had done. He was doing some of the most pioneering work on electromagnetism in life. Some of the biggest breakthroughs in optical biophysics that have been suppressed by a century of Rockefeller-funded operations to try to prevent us from understanding the electromagnetic components or expression of life, was pioneered by Louis Pasteur himself.
Well, actually, you bring up a good point, because, and I'm just throwing this out because I'm, now I'm a Rife practitioner, right? And I'm, you see, you can lower your load, right? You can keep the internal environment cleaner. But you bring up a good point. Like, these guys might both have been good scientists who cared about humanity, but those who are in these positions of control use a theory that benefits them the most. So the germ theory taken to extreme, kind of like Darwin's theory of evolution, and applied is part of this whole eugenics thing. Just like environmentalism, it's all applied to harm people, to divide us, to indoctrinate us.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
and really to get rid of us.
Here's a good example. Every idea could be radicalized, and it's like, is the idea that the driving concept that gave the Renaissance so much power and goodness which is when you had the biggest explosion of human population as well. If you look at the demographic charts of human history, it's the Renaissance period that you see like this giant hyperbolic or geometric increase of population. That didn't happen because we're a virus, the way we've been told. That happened because just look at the rate of discoveries, inventions, new insights into music, science, architecture, sanitation, that all exploded with what allowed that. It was the concept that human beings were all sacred and made in the image of God. And that appreciation of the sacredness of the individual came with a bit of a dual, it's like a dual use technology. It's a power, because it's a great, you're tapping into the idea that every peasant has creative powers in alignment with expressing God's will, God's creation in a peasant, not just a king or a lord, but a peasant. Everybody can do that. So on the one, that can also become radicalized towards egotism. And you could see how that was perverted by the Enlightenment, the worst elements of the Enlightenment later on, which took the enshrinement of sacred individualism and individual rights, and then hyper-individualized the psyche through John Locke, Newton, all of the empiricists who said there is no necessity for God, because human science and logic have proven that everything is raw, mechanical rules and laws that we can discover. And because we can do that, we've discounted finally any necessity to have recourse to God as a prima mobile, a prime mover. We don't need that anymore. So now humans become essentially the replacement for God, the power of logic, which then enshrines. It became very quickly in the course of like John Locke's work, enshrined in the idea of hyper radical personal liberty at the expense of a whole. So it was like, we used to believe in the collective, in the whole, in the greater good. Now we know that it's all about the individual, and the collective will just somehow become good if you let each individual do what they want to do. Now that was also Adam Smith. It was also ultimately Malthus in some ways too, because he was also a promoter of Adam Smith. And so this becomes the fight between Herbert Spencer versus Galton. So in the 1880s, you got this fake debate, kind of like what I mentioned between Keynes versus Hayek. You have Francis Galton versus Herbert Spencer. Well, they seem to be fighting. They're both two British imperialist Malthusians, both of them. And they're having this debate between how do you apply Darwin's theories to human societies. And we know Galton, what his view was: top-down control centralized by government to impose the science from scientific engineers at the top. Herbert Spencer was taking the view that no, liberalism, Adam Smith, if we just let everybody do as they willst, Aleister Crowley, let them all just satisfy their personal desires to feed their libidos and their passions and avoid pain, the way Adam Smith prescribes, and let the markets just be, then the weak will be filtered out naturally as the strong will assert their dominance naturally, and the order will just find equilibrium naturally that way. We don't need any government intervention. So it was a fake debate.
Interesting.
Yeah. But again, it's this the more you can atomize the people into sensualism around the idea that is true of the sacredness of inalienable rights, if you can pervert that, then you can bring the parts into conflict with the whole. Versus the founding fathers, who were like, no, let's actually make both coexist together, where every individual finds that with great freedom, true freedoms come with responsibilities. If there's no responsibility with the freedom, then it's not real freedom. It's something else. It's just license. So
a lot of people are finding these concepts confusing, and they take years to sink in. Like it's not one or the other. It's a combination of things, but done in the proper way. It's like, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. This whole collectivism and communism got perverted. And instead of, everyone being equal, everyone was equally poor. Even in the Canadian Charter of Freedom Rights, it's not a very strong document. And I've talked to people and interviewed them versus the Constitution, because we're in our document, we're equal under the law, which allows the judges to impose collectivism. Oh, well, for the good of society, the most equal thing for everyone would be for you to do X, Y, and Z, wear masks inside, do all these mandates. We've seen breaches in that. And the US Constitution has held up a lot stronger. I have a lot of faith in that, and how the strong patriots in the US can use that to take their Constitution back. But I mean, we have these scenarios where these Darwinists and eugenicists now moving into this whole phase using AI for evil with ChatGPT and robotics and everything are taking this to the extreme. And their vision, I think, is like that, 1984, they want always conflict. You've got the one side versus the other. What did they call it? Eurasia versus
East Asia and Eurasia and Oceania.
yeah, but I'm heartened because of they're not getting there. They wanted all constant fighting, but look at BRICS now. You've got these strong alliances with Russia and China and Brazil and some other countries. But I heard there's so many other countries applying to get into BRICS that pretty soon they'll have 51% of the world's population, and they can just shift into a new currency. And once we get the, if you get the bad guys away from having the money, they're really going to be limited in what they can do for harm.
Big time. Amen to that. No, that's something that was never part of this New World Order like script that they'd been operating on. It was not the convergence. And I mean, early on, you could say, well, yeah, because people will say, but the BRIC concept that emerged in 2001 was originally planned out by some creeps at Goldman Sachs who wanted to create they could see that there was already a convergence of interests amongst Russia, China, India, Brazil, big powers that were outside of the sort of transatlantic sphere of NATO Five Eyes influence. They could see that there was a convergence already beginning, but they wanted to try to get control of it and sort of control the terms under which this convergence would happen. So yeah, I agree. That's proven to me that Goldman Sachs, creepy figures, were behind the original formulation of the BRIC. However, things don't often go according to plan because these are still ultimately sovereign nation states. And what happened in the course of the ensuing decade after that, 2001, was, well, on the one hand, you had a deeper rejection of the Malthusian ethic. You had Putin come out basically saying in 2007, we see that the NATO is expanding and trying to create a first strike capability against Russia and also implicitly China. That's exactly what ended up happening. He called out. He said, we're not going to play this game. Either you work with us as friends and allies, building things in our common good, or this is going to get ugly. And he warned it in 2007. And he's been playing in a pretty diplomatic good way up until now, giving us as many opportunities, Canadians, Americans, Europeans, to find points of collaboration around Nord Stream 2, building the Arctic. He's made offers to work in with Canadian companies over the years to build the Bering Strait Rail Tunnel, which he offered in 2007 and again in 2011. He offered Canada under Harper and Obama and first Bush a joint project to have this three-way Bering Strait Rail Tunnel that would open up new development and raw materials development in the north, which would provide not only massive assistance for there's so many things. You create qualitative jobs, trade schools. You'd be able to finally help break the native concentration camps that have been set up, where these people have been forced to just like live in these go nowhere zones where they only have like government some government money to stay in that location and just do drugs while they wait to die. That's been like a racist policy for many generations put onto the Inuit community. That would have broken that model forever. Wow. So Russia showed a lot of goodwill. China showed a lot of goodwill. And now they've been pushed to the point where, well, it's either they go back to the designs of the 1990s and kill off their own people and destroy their own traditional values and just submit under this one world government, which they won't do. No. Or do what they're currently doing, which is unveil a new security economic architecture premised around leaping over limits to growth, creating abundance instead of creating scarcity, not eating bugs, eating food,
Yes, but also because one of the things we touched on, we didn't go too far on it. I had Pasteur Hildebrandt on talking about sort of returning to traditional family values. So, I mean, they're also going that direction. I know China isn't allowing all of the gender dysphoria in the media and in their TVs. Neither is Russia. I mean, I think their education systems are far superior to ours, sadly.
Yeah, you want to get your genitalia cut off as a kid to become something else. You can't do that in China or Russia. You just can't. And that's the way it should be. You just can't do that.
And the this return to a family the strength of the family versus the strength of the state, because they've been down communism. They've experienced the harsh reality that communism leads to genocide and destruction of life and wealth. And we're just learning those lessons here in North America. I met a gentleman from Europe who came to one of our events, and I was trying to do a very calm debate with him about Russia and Ukraine, but he was getting irate. And I was thinking, I just don't have all the details. But he was like, oh, the Russians are such bad guys. And there's such a history there to unpack. And even the Ukrainians fighting amongst themselves, the Russian indigenous, the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So a lot of these things are so complicated, but overall, you look at the actions of someone like Putin, who wouldn't even let GMO foods in his country because he saw that was a conduit for poisoning us, and it still is to this day, and we have it everywhere. One of the many ways that they have toxic chemicals in food. So he's a guy who cares about his people. So how can you sum this up for the audience? This is like it's connecting all these things. It's been going on not just for hundreds of years, but it's been thousands of years, trying to find a way to eliminate your competition, really, or gather more.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, and China, there's so many points. One of the ways that these psyops work is through keeping us ignorant to the reality, not only of what China and Russia are actually doing, what they have done, what they have built, the abundance creation that they have done that is measurable. You can investigate it. All of these things are doable, but we have been consciously kept from having general awareness or concern about those types of pesky facts. So with that ignorance, also the general ignorance of the culture of China, the cultural value systems, it's a different way of thinking. If you're somebody living in the Chinese matrix with 5,000 years of history, Confucian, Buddhist principles, values, Taoism is there, you're living in a different metaphysical geometry than somebody who has been a product of a Western conditioning. It's a different way of thinking and feeling. There are common threads. You'll find common themes emerge in both, but you have to be able to sort of immerse yourself in that world as much as you can to sort of think and feel as a Chinese identity would. How do they make decisions? What is a meritocracy? Because I mean, it's like, unlike us, they actually have a meritocracy. Most of the people working in their government, in the Politburo, in the standing committees, they all have real world trade school, real world skills. They've done things. They're like all engineers, all of them. Not maybe one or two or not, but I mean, the greatest amount of engineers and scientists in their government, which is the way we used to do things back before I was born and before you were born. There was a different mode of having administrators who had experience in the field that they were administrating. They still maintain that. Russia went through perestroika in the 90s, so it took Russia longer to kick out George Soros. China kicked Soros out earlier, back in 1989. Russia took them up until 2015.
I wanted to add too, because, and this is something we don't have time, I know we're running out of time now, but they still have their own deep state in China. I mean, they're still getting rid of it, but we haven't even tackled it. I mean,
the amount of hypocrisy from people in the truth movement right now who really hate the Great Reset, but are so quick to drink the Kool-Aid and just blame China for being this evil thing based on like some framed narratives that they've been fed, without recognizing that, look, we got it so much worse. Like the deep state has its tentacles and influence so much deeper that has been going on since Vietnam War and their killing of Kennedy. It wasn't the Chinese who killed Kennedy, okay? This is like something else that's been working us now for a few generations. It's really bad, and we've done a lot of evil to the world. When you compare the amount of governments overthrown, leaders assassinated in third world countries, carried out by the CIA in our name, and you compare that to how many of similar case studies do you have that were done by the Russians or the Chinese over the last 80 years, it's not even comparable. It's like we're on the wrong side of history, people. Even though we had all of these nice pleasures being part of a consumer society where we had these apparent freedoms to buy what we wanted and like say what we wanted for a period. Okay, that was all nice, but that came with a cost of us having to look away, use increased rates of slave labor, child plantations in cobalt mines in Congo, and all of this poverty of the world had to exist for us to maintain the consumer society lifestyle for the past 45, 50 years. I'm sorry to say it, but that was that's the price that we paid for the fake, freedom that we thought we got. That's now being taken away from us.
Yeah. Will
So,
that be flipped is what
yeah.
I wonder. Will we be the slave trade, the slave miners of the future? I mean, I hope not.
I hope not too, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible, but people have to
It's
eat some
not.
humble pie,
They
recognize
do.
that ultimately the greatest water, that is always what I'm trying to get at, is to get people to really look at what has China done, what has Russia done, what in not what the media says, but what have they actually done to pull out people from poverty, create abundance, create a real challenge to the oligarchy. How did we used to do those things in the past, and we haven't for a long time? And then how can we recognize that the greatest water to put out this fire of this oncoming danger of a new dark age for civilization, and it is a danger of a dark age, a mass big culling of the population,
huge.
and the forgetting of much of our collective memories could easily happen for many generations. I don't want that.
Dumb
But
down.
the best water to put out that fire of evil is coming from Eurasia. It's not coming from, like, that's
I
where
agree.
Russia, China, India, increasingly the global south, increasingly Africa, that's where the actual utilization of the powers of the sovereign nation state are being wielded to carry out a war, a battle against this evil oligarchy, this dragon. It's happening. So either we act the fools and continue to see the champions of civilization right now as the enemy and play along with this George Soros's game, or we eat some humble pie, start cleaning up our own backyard, and start problem solving so that we can work to calibrate ourselves with the offers that have been made many, many times by Russia, by China, by India, by other countries that want to be our friend, that want to avoid World War III. Exactly. Do anti-Darwinian stuff. Don't do what Darwin would want. Work like a human. Collaborate. Right. I was wrap it up to the beginning. That's the theme.
Thank you. That's perfect. That's the solution to everything. Just go against everything that's said for them. Go against the eugenics and live and create life, but do it in a sacred way that is inspired by moral. If you don't believe in God, by morality and loving your neighbor, so that your actions for yourself are also ones that will impact your neighbor in a loving way.
Yes, it's so nice.
There we go.
Nice.
We put a little
love
bow
God,
on
love
it
your
at
fellow
the end.
man. Love yourself. Yeah. And I would say, look, I'll just make one last accolade for people, as I pointed out at the beginning. Nothing that we said today could possibly do justice to the topics that we were discussing. So I'd say if people really want to dig in more deeply and really get a firmer grounding or rooting of a lot of these ideas, pick up my book, The Clash of the Two Americas, Anglo-Venetian Roots of the Deep State, or on the China nut, because that's a tough nut to crack. My wife and I would just put with our friend Jason Dahl, who's a collaborator, a filmmaker. We just finished producing a 27-minute video on how China kicked out Soros, how Soros played a role in the overthrow of Trump. What was he actually trying to stop in terms of a U.S., China, Russia relationship? That we go through that in this video. People can go as of next week onto CanadianPatriot.org or our YouTube or Rumble or Bitchute pages and find that video.
Oh, great.
And it's sort of acting kind of like a commercial to promote our special report on breaking free of anti-China psyops, how the Cold War is being revived and what you can do about it. It's a full color special report that can be got on our websites as well.
Love it. That's amazing.
Highly useful stuff. Yeah, I think
I'm gonna pick that up. And just tell the audience before you leave, because I know you're going to be away for a while. You and your wife are heading out on this like big tour of Asia and like giving talks. I mean, that's unbelievable. Where are you going? How long will you be away?
It's going to be Ireland. There's going to be a conference on Think Local. Catherine Austin Fitz will be one of the speakers, and Alex Craner, a few others. So that'll be in Ireland, just south of Dublin, on February 25th. And if people want to know more information, they can email me at Canadian Patriot 1776 at tutanota.com. I'll give you the info on how to register if you're in or around Ireland or the UK. The other one is going to be in Switzerland on March 10th and 11th. Wow. And that's going to be more on East-West relations and a little bit more on the metaphysics of politics. So, and that'll feature also speakers like Daniel Ganser, the guy who did probably the most valuable work unveiling the reality of Operation Gladio, the utilization of Nazis and fascists after World War II into U.S. intelligence and British intelligence. Also, Dirk Polman is going to be there. It's going to be over. He's another award-winning filmmaker is going to be speaking. So yeah, if people also want to know about that event and they're in or around Switzerland, they can also email me to that same thing, Canadian Patriot 1776 at tutanota.com. And then in Japan, yeah, we're going to do some stuff more business and collaborating around a video series.
Oh, wow. Because I mean, another time, if I could get you back, I know you're getting more and more popular. I'd love to dive into Japan. My kids want to go there. We're probably going to go later this year. So I'd love your comments on that. I wanted to.
What you should do is interview my wife. She's written a series of 3 articles recently.
I love that. Yeah.
Breaking down a lot of what goes on behind the scenes around the Japan questions. So yeah, reach out to her and I'm sure be happy to talk to you.
We'll set that up. And finally, before we leave, you recommended this book, which I'm going to read by Lyndon LaRoche, a bit of a controversial figure if you Google him, but great, really solid ideas. And I know you were trained with his kind of philosophy for a while. It's called There Are No Limits to Growth. Lyndon LaRoche Jr., I picked that up recently along with some of his other books, like Anyone Can Be a Genius. I forget. It's called
Genius Can Be Taught. That's a great book. Yeah, I have it too.
I have so many books now. I mean, hard books I'm reading, but I am going to read this one very soon. Hopefully next time I interview you, I will have read it. And other than that, thanks so much, Matthew. It's always a pleasure. Have a great trip. And I will reach out to get your wife on my show to cover Japan. Take care.
It'll probably be in April because we're going to be traveling around. But yeah, looking forward to our next conversation. I'm sure Cynthia will be happy to too. And it's always a pleasure, Tish, talking to you. I love these chats.
Oh, thank you. I'm learning a lot. Take care. Have a
great trip. I hope your son digs it as well. I hope he enjoys the conversation.
Yeah, I'll get him to listen. We're going on a ski trip, but after that, I will.
Well, he can't get out of the car while you're driving, so that's good.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye. Ciao.